Okay, everybody see it?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right. So today we're happy to share the story and artwork of artist Dave Fadden. Dave's a Native American artist from the Adirondack Mountains in Akwesasne, New York. And for any of you who don't know where that is, that's northern New York on the border to Ontario and Quebec. And as you'll hear, Dave comes from a family of artists, and his grandfather founded the Six Nations Indian Museum. Dave's work is well known across northern New York and in Native communities. Dave's signature work features the faces of Native American people. So now let's hear from Dave Fadden. Dave? Are you on off mute?
I'm off mute, but the video isn't on.
Okay.
Do you need the video?
We want to see your face.
Yes, please.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, I guess I'll get started. Again, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is David Fadden. The middle name you see there is actually my Mohawk name, and it's pronounced Ganet Tagael. And that's a Mohawk name that translates into English to mean patches of snow. I was born in March, and when I was born, there was actually a thaw, and a lot of the snow melted, and there were patches of snow on the ground. And it was my great grandmother on my mother's side who gave me that name. And among the Mohawk people, it's always on your mother's side, the eldest woman names all the children. And so that became my name. It's Ganyet Tagael. And I belong to the Wolf clan of the Mohawk Nation. And the Mohawk Nation is part of a larger group called the Haudenosaunee, or the Iroquois Confederacy. And our traditional homeland extended from about Lake Champlain area, which is near Plattsburgh, New York, and it stretched all the way down from the St. Lawrence River to the Mohawk River, which is near Albany, New York. And the other nations include the Oneida, the Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and later the Tuscarora. And our territory extended from about Lake Champlain to around Buffalo, New York. And today, contemporary, our communities are scattered throughout New York State and also into Canada. And where I am right now is in a tiny town called Onchayota, New York. And that is in the heart of the Adirondack Mountains. It's part of the traditional Mohawk territory. But our largest community where my family's from is a community called Akwesasne, or also known as the St. Regis Mohawk Indian Reservation. And there in that community, the border between the United States and Canada actually cuts it in two pieces, the community of Akwesasne. I currently live, I spend my time here in the mountains and also at Akwesasne on the Ontario side of the reservation. And I try to get up here as often as I can to paint. It's very secluded out in the middle of the woods. It's very quiet. And so I've been here for the past probably 3-4 weeks, just really painting as much as I can. But also, I just want to talk a little bit about my upbringing and how I became an artist. And I grew up with a family of artists of all kinds. My father, he was an art teacher. He taught 7th and 8th grade art for 32 years. And he retired in, I believe, 1994. And so I had an art teacher right at home growing up. My mother, she did woodwork, wood carving. She'd carve animals from miniature bears to different types of birds and very delicate carving work. And she also was a painter and also dabbled in pottery. Both of my brothers are painters. My older brother, he had stopped for quite a while and he's just now getting back into painting, and he's pretty talented. All of my grandparents did some sort of work, creative creative work. My grandmother on my mother's side made traditional Mohawk baskets, and that's art form among a lot of Native people that they're still going on, but it's one of those art forms that's kind of fading away a little bit. But it's they use the black ash tree, and they make splint out of the tree, and then they refine it down to very thin pieces, and they can weave it around a mold. And they also use sweetgrass, and also some of the baskets are dyed different colors. And you can just Google that Mohawk baskets, and you'll see all sorts of styles, and it's a very beautiful art. My grandfather on my mother's side made lacrosse sticks, and that was lacrosse is a native game. Like the lacrosse you see today is based on what we played historically for thousands of years. And they used to make lacrosse sticks out of hickory, and that was a whole art form in itself, and carving and shaping, and sometimes you'd carve designs, and my grandfather made those. My grandmother on my father's side was also a basket maker, and my grandfather on my father's side, he was a prolific bead worker. He did all kinds of bead. It was either wampum beads or glass seed beads. He'd do loom work. Very prolific bead worker. And my grandfather established the Six Nations Indian Museum right here in Anchiota in 1954. And so I grew up inspired not only by my family, my father, he was in addition to being an art teacher, he was also an illustrator. You just Google his name, John Fadden, and you'll see all sorts of his work. He primarily worked with pen and ink, very delicate work. But he illustrated probably over 100 books, in his career, and he still dabbles in it. And so I was surrounded with this my whole life, and also the museum. And also, if you Google Six Nations Indian Museum, you see our website, you might find a few images of the interior of the museum. And it's a very small 4-room building. It's 20 feet wide by 80 feet long, but it's just jam-packed full of artifacts, art. Even the floors are painted with different native designs and motifs. Every square inch of the place is covered. And so as a young kid, I was surrounded by all this creativity, this art. And my grandfather was also a storyteller. And so when people would come to visit the museum, it was just hearing the stories that he would tell triggered my imagination. Because a storyteller using words creates imagery in your mind. And so hearing these stories as a young person really helped develop my creativity, because like today, there's beautiful stories, but they're on the television or the movie screen, and it's all the imagery is done for you. But with the storyteller, or it's like reading a book as well, is that these words initiate these images, and your imagination is just let loose. And so I had my grandfather, and he was a profound influence on my life, and also the imagery within the museum itself, the artifacts, the beadwork, the clothing, the art. And so that in my life, I had that at a very, very young age. And so that was the beginning. And some of my influences, in addition to the museum itself, were other artists. And I remember thumbing through a magazine, I found an illustration by Norman Rockwell. And I was just really taken aback by how realistic his art looked. And I think I found we had a calendar. I think that's what it was. And I just saved that calendar for years and years. I might still have it, where I just studied his work. Also, in addition to them, was the Wyeth family. My mother she had a book about Andrew Wyeth. And so I really studied other artists. And so that was the beginning where I started to look into art in a serious way. And I would often do sketches of what was around me, and that's the mountains. I would do landscapes, and I also copy or follow my father's footsteps, and I tried pen and ink. But I found that that wasn't my calling. It wasn't that, it didn't appeal to me because it was really hard. And so I turned to just drawing and drawing faces, and eventually turned to painting. Now, my first paying art job was when I was 19. My father was asked to illustrate a book, but he was too busy. And so he suggested they hire me. And so I got the job, and I illustrated a book called Cave of Falling Water. And it was from that point forward, I've been able to find various illustration jobs from time to time. And there was a stretch there in the early 2000s where I was really busy. I got a job with a company called Cortina Productions, where they did animation and museum interaction for museums all across the country. And so the first job with them was doing 9 animations for the National Museum of American Indian in Washington, D.C. And that was a last minute job, and I was working well into the early hours of the morning to try to meet a deadline. And so they liked my work, and they liked my work ethic. And that led to other jobs for other museums, and I did some more animation for Monterey Bay Aquarium out in California, the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And I also did some work for the Natural History Museum in New York City. But I did work for them for a number of years until finally, I think it was the recession hit, and I just lost contact with them. So during these years in my 20s and 30s, I would have art shows on occasion. And art has always been not my full-time job. It helps supplement my income. And I've worked at museums throughout New York State in my career, and I'm still working for a museum up on the reservation. But illustration and my own art hasn't been a full-time job. I'm almost on the cusp of being able to make my living off of my art, but I'm not quite there yet. And it's that whole marketing element that's really difficult to get into. And so, but my passion is the people I know, and that's the Ganikahaga or the Mohawk people. And I focus my attention to portraiture. And I've always painted faces, and I've studied anatomy. I don't have a formal degree. I took as many art courses as I could. I went to museums, and what was a big turning point in my career was a trip to New York City, the Metropolitan Museum. Spent the whole day looking at these beautiful works of art, all kinds of amazing Renaissance painters. And it was a long day, and we were just getting ready to leave when there was the last room. There was a small painting, and it was a portrait of Benjamin Franklin. And I was able to get really close, and I looked at it and I studied it. And it was at that very moment I understood how that painter created that image of Benjamin Franklin. It was almost like, of all those years of experimenting and trying to learn the art of portraiture, that I understood it just by looking at that one painting. It's like that light bulb went off. So I rushed home, and I used that observation, and that was a turning point in my skills as a painter. I've always worked in acrylic, just simply because of the fact that I never had a good studio. And like oil, I've tried oil, watercolor, and oil is kind of messy and a lot of cleanup. And acrylic's really easy. You just need water, soap and water. And so I stuck with acrylic, and I kind of use studying the oil techniques and blending of paint. And I tried to do that with acrylic, and because oils take a long time to dry, and you can blend a lot easier. Acrylic dries very fast. And so what I eventually learned how to do was a technique called alla prima. And what that simply means is all at once. And so you kind of paint fast, and so you can get your blending done before the paint dries, and you do many layers. Next slide, please. Now, this was one of my early pieces. As you can see, I was very young. This is 1974. I was 4 years old, and I just wanted to reiterate the fact that I probably wouldn't be an artist if it wasn't for my family and the support that I had. You know, not only from my father as an art teacher, my mother, my grandparents. You know, I was very fortunate enough to have such a nurturing family. And one quick anecdote, I must have been about 3 or 4 years old. We used to have a sectional couch in our living room, and it left an opening behind the corner of that couch. And I was able to climb in there. It was almost like a little cave, and I would hang out in there, and I'd bring blankets and a pillow. But I also brought pens and pencils, and I would draw on the wall, different drawings and things like that. That was my little hiding spot until finally one day my mother was cleaning and she moved the couch and she discovered my artwork on the wall. So rather than scolding me, rather than yelling at me and telling me not to do it, they bought me my own desk, bought me paper, even bought me canvas, all kinds of paint, and encouraged me to work on paper rather than on the walls. But eventually I was able to do murals in my own bedroom. And so that was my beginning. And that's one of my early pieces. And my mother saved every piece of artwork I ever did. And she has scrapbooks full of it. But anyways, I want to get right to my contemporary art. And this past year, I was very productive. Where I work in March of last year, when the pandemic hit, we closed right down. We went home. And, you know, it was a shock for everybody, you know, around the world, really. And rather than getting down on the situation and, you know, the worry, I turned my focus back to my art. And it's always been one of my safe places is when I'm working on a canvas. You're able to focus and you take all those troubles in life and you push them aside. If it's for an hour, if it's for 2 hours, or maybe if it's for a whole day, you can study something other than the negative things that is going on. So this past year, I've had a lot of time to really work on my art. And this piece here is one of my latest pieces. Her name is Judy Swamp, and she is a Mohawk elder from Akwesasne community. And her husband was a Wolf Clan chief, one of the Wolf Clan chiefs of the Mohawks. And she almost became a clan mother. And a clan mother is, see how our traditional system works is that when there's a need for a leader, a chief, a man doesn't nominate himself. It's a woman. She nominates a man to be a leader. And they raise him up, and the women talk about this individual if he has the right qualities. And it's usually the elders, the grandmothers, the aunts. The women know the children as they grow up, their qualities, their characteristics. And the women nominate that man to be a leader. And then all the people of the community have to agree that he would be a good representative. And if it's an agreement, that man becomes a chief for the rest of his life. But once you're in a position of power, you change. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. So if this leader starts to go down a different path that goes against what his people wish, it's those clan mothers that warn him that he's not doing his job. They warn him 3 times, and if he doesn't correct his actions, he's removed from office and he can never be a chief again. But her daughter, this woman Judy, her daughter Angela became a clan mother. And I stumbled on this picture, a photograph, my reference, actually on Facebook. And I love that smile. And she has a look on her like you almost don't know what she's thinking. and it's almost a mysterious look. But I did found that I stumbled on the file on my computer, and it started out as a sketch. I just wanted to practice, and I did a quick sketch, and it turned out pretty good. And so I continued it, and I finished the painting, and this is the final result. And her name is Judy. Next slide, please. This one is, I live, my home on the reservation is right on the St. Lawrence River. And actually the river is probably about not even 50 yards away. And so the sunsets there are unbelievable, you know, on the water and the colors. And but I started this painting. I found a photograph of, there's a famous photographer named Edward Curtis. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, he traveled across the country and he took photographs and portraits of Native Americans. And I study those faces quite a bit. And I don't do exact portraits or copies of his work, but I use it as a reference for lighting, and just almost like a practice, the shades and shapes. I try not to do portraits, but I use it as a reference for lighting. And this is how this one began. Also, it was another sketch. And then I liked how it turned out. And then lately, I've been really getting into using a palette knife. And the background is very, they would call it impasto style painting, very thick paint. And it's a little tricky because if you add too much paint, it sometimes it muddies up, and it turns like a brown muddy look. And so you almost have to do it in stages. You plan it out where you want your lights, where you want your darks. And this was for the background. And I really, really enjoy this technique. You know, sometimes it doesn't always turn out. Like I said, it turns muddy, but every once in a while you get the colors just right. And that's why I call this one Sunset by the River. Next slide, please. This is another painting, recent painting I did. And as you can tell by the background, there's, again, using the palette knife, did a lot of experimentation. This one actually, the first try, the background turned very muddy. And so what I did is I took the lightest of yellows, and I did that first, and then later added a little bit of different colors. And I didn't do the palette knife, the different colors when the paint was still wet. I waited for it to dry, then I did another layer, waited for that to dry, then I did another layer. But this painting, I wanted to create a sense of motion. And it's obvious when you see a runner, you know, he's moving pretty fast. But the background, I wanted all the paint to seem to be flying by. And the subject matter, the runner, traditional, you know, historically, you know, well before telephones, well before even a telegraph, our means of communication were utilized with runners. And these were trained young men who could run about 100 miles in a day. And that's what their job was. And their job was to deliver messages between the communities, whether it be a meeting, they want to have a grand council, whether it be some sort of conflict coming about, you need to send messages out. And this painting isn't quite finished, but in his hand that's trailing him, he's going to have what they call wampum strings. And wampum is a bead that's made from a quahog shell. And the wampum is used as a means of communication as well. They could be in different colors and designs. But what wampum did was add credence to his message, meaning that anybody could run into a village and, you know, say some kind of message. But if you're carrying that wampum, that means that your message is true, that it is truly coming from another community. And they say they could run from Buffalo to Albany in 3 days. And that's amazing. And so I call this one the urgent message. Next slide, please. And again, this one is, I really like this painting. I utilized the palette knife quite a bit, as you can see. It's very, very thick paint. And I think I use about probably 2 tubes of paint on this one. And when I was younger and pretty much broke, I was very frugal with my paint because paint is very expensive. But after, I got a good job and I was able to sell some paintings, I still was very frugal with my paint, but it came to a point when I'm like, I want to try something new. And so I really put the paint on the palette and I use my knife, and I really enjoy this technique, but it does use a lot of paint. And so I've been ordering a lot of ultramarine blue and white these past few years. But I call this one Clan Mother Listening. And like I said earlier with the other painting about clan mothers, their job in our council isn't necessarily to do any of the speaking. It's usually the chiefs, the men who do all the deliberation and all the talking in council. But they never have a council without those clan mothers present, listening to what they're saying. And so I wanted this creating painting reflecting that, of a clan mother listening to a council. Next slide, please. This is another one, and this is again, as you can tell, it's very thick impasto style background. This was I wanted a painting that reflected our current time, and like most people, it was very stressful. Rather than getting into politics, the things that are going around in this country, it's very disturbing. No matter what you're from, what background you're from, it's chaotic. It's disturbing. You watch the news, and there was a point during this past year where I just stopped watching the news. It was too disturbing. But I was at, a number of years ago, I was at a meeting where it got rather contentious and voices were raised. And you could feel the tension in the air. But I looked at the end of the table, and there was this young woman who just was as calm as could be. And you could tell that wasn't getting to her, the tension in the air. And so this is a painting reflecting that. And it's also reflective of our current condition, where you have to maintain your peaceful mind. And it's difficult when you're just surrounded by all this chaos. And, I did this one, and I posted it online. I don't have a website of my own. I just use Facebook. And within an hour, it was sold. There was a woman from, I believe it was Syracuse, New York, that she had to have it. And so that one, I packed it up and put it in the mail. And and I really liked the painting too. I was happy to sell it, but it was sad to see it go. Next slide. This is a smaller piece. I think this one is only maybe about 12 inches by 12 inches. It's I had done a quick sketch of a face probably about 2 or 3 years ago. Never really liked it. And so I kept the eye. I like the eyes in this portrait, but the rest of the face, I didn't like the lighting. And so I changed it up and also use a palette knife, as you can tell, to create the headdress and also a little bit of the background. And a number of paintings that I did during this past year was using the palette knife, very thick paint. But I call this one Ready to Speak. Next slide, please. This one I just did early December. Actually, the year is wrong, but it was last December. This is the first snow we had here in the mountains, and I went for a little hike. Not too far on our property, there's a small brook that goes through, and it never freezes over, but you can always hear it. And in the spring, when the snow melts, it's really pretty loud, and to me, it always reminded me of a drum, the sound of the water. But anyways, I went for a little hike, and I just using my iPhone was snapping a bunch of pictures, and so I took my camera, my phone, and I put it in the tree, and I walked a little bit away, and I had set the timer, and I did a few photographs of myself. I don't have models regularly handy, so a lot of times I use myself as a model. And obviously, my hair doesn't look like that, and I just used the lighting as a reference. And so I hadn't done a landscape in quite a while, and I wanted to get a sense of the depth, the coldness of that area. And this one is probably about 3 feet by 5 feet. And this actually didn't take too long to paint. I was really into the painting, and I worked on it for, I think it was about every day for about 2 weeks. But anyways, and another point I wanted to make too is that I don't watch a lot of television. Uh, I watch the news, see what's going on, making sure we're not at war or anything. And then in the evenings, I paint. Sometimes if I'm working on a painting, I'll work right till 2, 3 in the morning, depending on, if I can stay awake. But that's the quietest time for me. Next slide, please. This one, I wanted to get a feeling of a campfire, different light source, like the light sources from underneath. I wanted a warm feeling. And also the background is impasto as well, the palette knife. And I'm not quite finished this one, but I'm not sure if I like the hand, how that is. So I'm still kind of weighing my options. I may just paint the hand out, I'm not sure yet. You just have the imagery of the background as a big part of the painting. In this one, I call it a story. And in our culture, storytelling is vital for our history, because we didn't have a written language, but that doesn't mean we didn't have a complicated society. But what we do have is a rich oral tradition. And when I say storytelling, it can mean anything from a myth to a legend, to a family story. And that was not only a form of entertainment, it was a way of educating our youth, because you have valuable lessons that are portrayed in these stories. But we also have other stories that are vitally important. That we also have a constitution that is memorized, and it's recited from memory. And occasionally they will use wampum belts or wampum strings to remember certain elements of our constitution. And in a story about our government and how it formed, to recite it correctly in our own language takes about 10 days to recite. And that's the lifetime of learning. And our stories, even our constitution is flexible, and it changes throughout time. But it's a living constitution because it's up here. And most youth and most Iroquois people are familiar with the story in the Constitution as well. And that's why storytelling is important. Next slide, please. This one, I wanted to portray a young man. And the reason is that I was contemplating my own life and I work with a lot of youth. And when you're at a certain age as a young person, your late teens, early 20s, you're not quite sure what you want to do yet in life. And so you're looking. like when I was young, I always knew I could paint, but I never thought of it as a career. Uh, when you're young, your mind's all over the place. And, there was a point in my life I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be environmental conservation, police. So there's numerous things that, as a young person, a trail or path you want to take. And this painting is of a young man from Akwesasne who I worked with. He got a job at the culture center where I work, and he was quite knowledgeable of the culture and the history. And he was learning how to do public speaking. I think he was about 21 years old, but he also had gone to school to be an HVAC technician. You work with furnaces and air conditioning. And he dropped out right before he was to graduate. And I encouraged him to go back and finish, because that was one of my biggest regrets, was not finishing college, not going to art school. That's what I should have done. But hindsight's 2020. But it was at that age as well. I was kind of aimless. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so when I saw this young man and he had almost finished getting his certification, I really, with all my effort, encouraged him to at least finish it. So it doesn't matter what path you eventually take, you'll have this certificate if you need it. And so I did this painting kind of in honor of that young man. Like, he's at a point in his life where he's trying to find his way. Next slide, please. This is another a small painting I did using a palette knife. And if you, on my Facebook page, if you go on, you can scroll down. I did a quick time lapse of the beginnings of this painting. And the time lapse is only maybe a minute long, or maybe 2 minutes. But it was about 40 minutes to an hour of work. And that was the beginning of this painting. It's a rather small painting. And just to get a sense of the process of a painting. And again, I did the face in a traditional format, but then this was during my palette knife phase. I obviously took out the palette knife. And I did some of the colors of maybe an animal skin, a deer hide as the shirt. But I used in the background brilliant blue, a little bit of a blue, ultramarine blue, and burnt umber for the darks. And this one I did, the paint was still wet, because on his shirt you see a little bit of the blue also in the paint. And so that was dabbed in there. And I call this one Resolute. He just has an expression that it's going to take a lot to change his mind. Next slide, please. This one I obviously did in the fall, the autumn. Here in the mountains, the colors are unbelievable in the fall. And this year was particularly brilliant. And I just was obviously influenced by the colors of the leaves and the trees and the changing of the seasons. And I was using an old photograph I found that I'm constantly collecting photographs for reference and just putting them on my computer. And I stumbled on this photograph and I liked his expression. And so that's how it started. And then I did the colors. And the harvest time is a very important, for our people as well as all people, when your gardens are ready to harvest. And our people, our primary source of food was through agriculture, the corn, the beans, the squash, the three sisters, we called them. That was our primary source of food. We were farmers, and our villages were, we didn't move around like the Plains Indians out west. Their food source was the buffalo, and they followed the buffalo. But our people were farmers, and so our villages were there for a long time. But the harvest time is important because that's when we gather all our food to store it for the long winter. And we have a harvest ceremony that lasts several days. And there's a lot of words of gratitude that are expressed to the food plants that sustain us. Next slide, please. These are 3 very small paintings I did. I did these fairly quickly. There's not so much impasto in here, but it was the first one, Across the Fire. If you notice the man, he has deer antlers in his headdress, and that's a symbol of a chief. Only chiefs could wear the deer antler. And in our council, and among the Mohawk people, there are 9 chiefs that sit in council. And when the seating is according to your clan or your family. And the saying goes, when you have an idea, you throw it across the fire, and then you wait for them to respond, and then they throw it back. And so I wanted this image reflects maybe a deliberation of a council. And it means you throw your ideas across. The next one, Gaze from Afar. It was a painting, it was kind of inspired by when I was a young man. There was this young girl that in one ceremony that she was sitting way down on the other end. She was looking in my direction for a long time. And I was like 18 years old. So when I looked back and we'd smile but it turns out I looked back and she was looking at some other young man. So I was like, rats. But anyways, that was kind of an inspiration of that painting, Gaze from Afar. And the next one is called Teachings. And there's just of a Native man, the Haudenosaunee man or Iroquois. And in all the imagery that in our culture that comes about, and you see designs of wampum belt, there's a floral design that's symbolic of the food plants. There's another symbol of life, of growing. And so I did that one fairly quickly, just in the idea that the imagery is always swirling in our minds about our traditional teachings. Next slide, please. And I also do portraiture. Where I work at a cultural center on Cornwall Island at Akwesasne, there's a young woman who she just had a baby. And she's our audiovisual technician, and she does a lot of video editing. And this was pre-pandemic. We were sitting around the lunch table, and another lady, she's a finance person, just happened to snap this picture on her phone of the mother's name is Michaela, and her daughter's name Oakland. Unusual name, but anyways, she right away I could tell. I was like, oh, that's I liked the composition, was right on, it was perfect. So I asked Michaela her permission, and she was happy to give me permission. But so I have traditional style portraiture, but also a little. I didn't use a palette knife, but I just use a rather thick paint for the background. Next slide. This one I really like because this lady is a neighbor of mine, and her name's Florence Benedict, and she's a basket maker, and she has since passed away. But she was one of the most generous people that I've ever met. She would make baskets, and she would give them away, and it was hours and hours of time to make one basket. But her whole family are very well known in our community. Her husband, Ernie, was a contemporary of my grandfather's. He was an educator, and he was well known among Native people as not only an educator, but as a leader. But his wife, Florence, I just have fond memories of her always working on the baskets. And so I did this one in honor of her, and I'm actually going to give it to her daughter, just because her mother gave so much to all of us. And so I did this painting in honor of Florence. Next slide. Now we get to another style of painting that I started, I believe it was 2014, 2015. This is a mosaic style of painting. There are dabs of paint that form a figure. And obviously this one's a dancer. And every dab of paint, I encircled the paint or the dab of paint with another color, and I put the design within that paint dab. And a lot of the imagery that is contained within the mosaics reflects my culture, different designs. And I did this one last year of a woman. There's a dance called the smoke dance, and it's a really energetic dance. And I just wanted a sense of motion. And as you can see, the center point is right where her belly would be, and it kind of explodes outwards. And the first mosaic I did was kind of by accident. I did actually took a selfie of myself with my mouth wide open, and I had to set up the lights and use my phone. And I was going to do just a simple monochromatic. And this painting, the original first one I did, was about 5 feet by 5 feet. It was rather large. And I did a monochromatic of that face, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of neat. But then I wanted to go a step further. And so what I did was I did dabs of paint. And the image, and it's like the painting behind me, it's from the mouth, and then the dabs went outwards like an explosion. And I did that with different colors, and I thought that was pretty neat. And then I went one step further in that I did that, circled every tile, every mosaic, and I put a design in it with a different color. And to do a painting like this takes about 3 to 4 months to complete if I work on it consistently every day. So it's quite a bit of work. And the first one I did, I sold it right away. I sold it to a museum in Quebec. They bought it. So I thought, it was like, oh, I must be on to something. Next slide, please. This is another mosaic I did. I think it was like the third one I did. And I call it Scream of the Silence. And this is one of the more powerful paintings I've ever done. In it, it reflects in Canada and also in the States, there's a movement to bring awareness to a horrible thing that's happening. A lot of Aboriginal First Nations people, women, are going missing. They disappear. I think it was last number was about 1,600 women have gone missing. A lot of them are young, all the way up to all ages, and the authorities are not doing enough. See, some of them are homeless in the cities. They just disappear or they turn up dead, and the authorities are, in some places they dismiss as a Native person. There's no urgency given to locating this individual. And so there's 1,600 in Canada and quite a number in the States as well, where these women have gone missing. So there's a movement going to bring awareness to this. It's a reflection of our social society that we all live in. And so I wanted to do a painting that reflects the unheard scream of these women who go missing. And so that's why I call it Scream of the Silence. And this painting was purchased by a family, and they had it on tour up in Ottawa, the capital of Canada. Next painting, please. Next slide. It's another mosaic. This one's a little bit smaller. It's I call it Busy World. And again, this is the busy world is what a number of years ago I just felt we live in a busy world. With cell phones, with Facebook, Twitter, all this motion movement going on. And as a Native person, it's like, how do we maintain our culture among all this new technology? There should be a way to enhance it, but it seems like all this technology is taken away from a lot of the important elements of our culture, our language, some of our social beliefs. And so I call this one Busy World. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I did it.
This is a close-up of, here it is. This is a close-up of some of the mosaics, just to give you a sense of what it entails. And you see it on the left, different native designs and figures. I try to include faces or they're like little paintings within a big painting. And I use a very fine liner brush because the mosaic tiles, some of them can be very small. And then if you see in the middle one, the middle image, you'll see there's a symbol of Darth Vader. And it's a funny story. The first mosaic I did, I was working on it, and because there's hundreds, if not thousands, of mosaics that you got to fill in, and you tend to run out of ideas. And I had, on that particular day, I had visited a friend of mine who's an avid Star Wars collector. He loves Star Wars, and he would get online on eBay, and he bought all kinds of Star Wars souvenirs, and from lunch boxes to even soap. And he told me about his collection, and then finally one day I went to visit him. Unbelievable! I could not believe it. There's thousands of pieces of Star Wars, products. And, it was unbelievable. So that night, as I was working on the painting, I had Star Wars on my brain, and so I included Darth Vader. And so when I have every mosaic I've done, I include 2 to 3 Star Wars references, and that's in honor of my friend Joe. And like the one on the right, there's a stormtrooper there. But and at our museum, I have some in my mosaics. And when there's young kids there, some of them might be a little too, you're not into museums or kind of restless. I'll have them look at my paintings, like, go find Darth Vader. And it takes them a long time, and they calm down. But anyways, next slide. And the one on the left, another close-up I was working on, and that was, you see the symbol of the coronavirus, and that was on my mind. And this is from that painting, the first mosaic on the slideshow was from Radiance, and I included that one. And then the one on the right, you see, I started watching, there's a show called The Mandalorian, and there's a little, they call it Baby Yoda. So I put him in there, but that's in that painting I call Radiance. And here's another close-up, and you see another Darth Vader. He's on the right side, and then a little bit off center to the left is the name Noah, and that was a friend of mine who passed away, and he had a heart condition. And so when I learned that he passed, I put his name in there. And then just to the bottom and to the left of that, you see the yin and yang symbol. So I just occasionally put random symbols in there. But as you notice, you see from the upper left going to the right, bottom right, that's the progression. And you see the unfilled mosaic or paint dabs. And that just shows you how it's done. Next slide. And this was actually a reproduction of the first mosaic on the slideshow called Radiance. And this was a print that was made for at Akwesasne, one of the tourism department commissioned me to do this image. And the idea was we were going to bring it to the community and to have visitors actually have them fill in each mosaic. And as you can see, a lot of the mosaics aren't filled in, but can you go to the next slide, please? We brought it to the Akwesasne powwow in the fall. This is in the fall of 2019, and we invited visitors to actually add their own images to this painting. And it's actually a reproduction of the original, and it was done printed on canvas. It was well received. We had at this particular powwow, there's people from all over the world. There's somewhere from Russia and Some were from some different European countries. I think it was Spain, Italian, and a lot of them just put their flag. But it was a really neat experiment, and I think that's something we want to try again. Next slide. This is the last slide. I think this is one of my most important paintings I've ever done. In the United States and also in Canada, there was an era from after the Civil War right up until 1996. There was a policy of the United States to assimilate Native people. And there was a man by the name of Pratt who was put in charge of this effort to basically, his saying was, kill the Indian, but you save the man. And what they would do is they'd go to the different Native communities across the country and they'd gather up the children. It wasn't the older folks, it was the young people from kindergarten age right through teenagers. They would gather them up and they'd put them on a train, and they had schools scattered throughout the United States and Canada. They were boarding school or residential schools. And if they were wearing their traditional outfit, how they dress, they'd take their clothes off. If they had long hair, they'd shave their hair. And they put a military uniform, and they would teach them how English, how to read, how to write. And my grandmother went to one of these schools, and she didn't speak English very well. Mohawk was her language. And she was punished severely for just talking her own language. They put soap in her mouth and to punish her for speaking. And so that was a traumatic time for her, my own grandmother. And I can remember she was well into her 80s, and I would visit her as often as I could because she had the best advice for life that I ever received. And I remember one day I walked in and she had a very somber look, very sad. And I asked her, what's wrong? And she said that she had a nightmare about those days when she was a young girl in those schools, and she just brought back all those feelings of, it's almost like neglect. And she had that all her life, the rest of her life, that feeling. And there was another old lady, I saw an interview with her. I believe she was a Seneca. And she was 6 years old and went to, I think they call it Thomas Indian School. And again, she didn't speak a word of English, not one word. And she didn't know why, but they would put her in this room and they'd close the door, lock it, no bed, just a mat on the floor, no windows, it was dark. And they kept her in there for 24 hours. Then they'd let her out, and then she'd come back, and she didn't know why she was being put in that room till finally she realized that the only time she was put in that room is if she spoke her own language. And so she didn't want to be put in that room anymore. So for 2 full years, she didn't speak at all. She became mute because she didn't know how to speak English. And then she knew if she spoke her own language, they put her in that room, cold, dark room. For 2 whole years, a 6-year-old girl didn't speak. But eventually she learned English. And then she was able to stay out of that dark room. But in that particular painting, I used an image from a Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. And there's a photograph. And this is just a part of that photograph. And in that painting, on the left side, you see the monochromatic, the grays, the sullen looks on the children's faces. Some of them are just so afraid, especially the young ones, the 5-year-olds are taken from their families. And so you see that in their faces on the left side. But then over the years, the attitudes about what they were doing to Native people started to change. And you see a little bit of color being added. And then towards the right side, you see smiles start to appear, more color, traditional clothing. And so that's where we are today. We survived. We went through this trauma. Our grandparents, even some parents, went through this hard, difficult time. But we are now able to learn our language. And it was illegal for us to practice our ceremonies. It wasn't allowed. You could go to jail. But now we can practice our own spiritual beliefs, have our own ceremonies, our own ways of talking, our own clothing. And so what this does, when you have a sense of your identity, you know who you are, you're proud. And so we have young people now who speak the language, who are happy, content, and proud of who they are. So originally I started this painting, it was very dark and negative, and it is a dark, negative part of American history. But we are emerging from it, and I wanted to end it on a positive note. And so among our people, our culture is thriving and it's growing. And so that's the last slide, and I guess I'll end it on that note. And now I can open it up to questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. I think everyone learned something new today, and your creativity really is very special. Any questions at this point? I didn't get any in chat, so I think people are studying your pictures.
I have a question.
Surely.
Is the artist aware of another artist from New York by the name of Chuck Close? Because I remember seeing radiating light coming from a central figure in his paintings. I was just wondering if David had heard or seen his work.
Oh yes, most definitely. That was a definite influence for that style, that mosaic. And I was profoundly influenced by his story. And because I've seen his work in magazines and I think in person as well when I was younger. His early work in the 60s was in the 70s, where he's very large, 9 foot tall, sometimes 15 feet tall, photorealistic portraits. Unbelievable work. What I wasn't aware of was that he had an aneurysm, I think it was in the mid 80s, in his neck, which paralyzed him. He can no longer walk. He has limited movement of his hands. But his story was that when he was in the hospital bed, he wasn't necessarily, I mean, he was probably concerned about not being able to walk, but he was more worried about how he could paint. And even when he was in the hospital bed recovering, he tried to figure out a way to harness a brush into some kind of wrap around his hand because he couldn't grab a brush. So he'd use that, and then he'd use his other hand to guide the brush. And he created a new technique of, he uses a grid format, but when you stand back, you see a face, a portrait. But when you zoom into each part of the grid, it's just color, shapes. And it's quite amazing. A couple of things that he said really influenced me. And one of them, see, a lot of artists, especially young artists, you want to outdo the last painting. You want to obviously improve, but you want to create a masterpiece. And this, sometimes you hit the nail on the head, sometimes you don't. And sometimes you're waiting to be inspired. And that's the wrong way to go. The way he put it, he says, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just get to work. And so the concept too is that through the process of painting or any creative element or art, that's where the ideas come from. You know, if you're the movement of moving a brush, your way your mind works is you come up with these new ideas. And so if you're waiting for an eagle to fly overhead to be inspired, so you're going to be sitting there a while. And so meaning the rest of us just get to work. And you look at it like a job. And there's days where I don't want to paint. Maybe I'm tired, or there's always an excuse. But after I heard him say that, for one whole year, I did something every single day for a whole year, whether it be sketching, whether it be painting, even working in clay, do something creative for at least an hour. And it was that year that my skills improved, and I came up with a lot of ideas too. So yes, I've heard of Chuck Close.
I have another question.
Sure.
Can you share anything about the spiritual foundations of the Mohawk people?
Well, it's fairly simple in the sense that it is very beautiful. Our ceremonies throughout the year are geared towards the natural world, the things that keep us alive. Like right now, this is our New Year's time, and this is things are quiet. It's a lot of snow, and it's a time to begin another year. And so it's an honor and giving thanks of the past year, all the gifts of life. And then you start in the spring, it's the first time you hear the thunder, that the rain's coming again. And there's a sense of gratitude that, things are continuing. And then there's also, in the summer, there's time for planting. There's a ceremony for that, as well as harvest, and there's ceremony for that. But the majority of it is geared towards the natural world, and the gifts that keep us alive. And in one sense is that, the Iroquois people, a lot of Native people in general, we look at the earth and everything on it as part of our family, and that we're a part of this place, and this is our home. The way we talk and address those things, like the earth itself, we refer to it as our mother. That's our mom. And so you treat the earth like you would treat your mother, because she sustains us. And even the moon, they refer to as our grandmother, the grandmother moon, and that her responsibility is to look over the women and the females, and the babies are born according to that moon. In the male side, the sun, we call it the elder brother, and the elder brother is a male, masculine, and the heat of the sun is in reference to like the heat of a sport, or heat of a battle, or hunting. You got to run. There's a lot of movement. It's a more aggressive part of life. But in general, all the things around us, it's a sense of appreciation. It's like Americans have one day for Thanksgiving. We have it every day. Every day of our lives, we give thanks to the things that keep us alive. And so that's a bit of our spirituality.
Hey, David, one other question came in about the size of the painting that we're showing right now. How big is that canvas? Is it on a canvas?
Yep, that's on canvas. That's about 5 feet by 5 feet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Any other
And
questions?
that one took
Sorry.
about a year to complete. There's 222 faces on that painting.
Wow. Any other questions at this point? If not, getting a lot of fantastic. Where is that painting displayed, Dave? The one that showed right now?
Right now, it's in my bedroom. I just had nowhere to put it. It was actually at a natural history museum. There was an art show last year, and then after the pandemic, I was able to get my painting back. But there hasn't been any art shows lately. But my hope is that some museum in maybe DC or even Ottawa will purchase it, because my idea, I want people to understand it, because it's a part of American history that most Americans just are simply unaware of. They don't know that this happened in this country, because it's not positive, but it's an idea is that when you make a mistake, learn from it and don't ever do it again.
Yeah, one of our members just posted, I think it belongs in the Smithsonian.
That'd be nice. If you know anybody, let them know.
That's good. And I encourage everyone as a follow-up, look back in our newsletter, and there's a link to the Six Nations Museum in Onchayota, New York. And then also David is on Facebook, so you can go to Dave Fadden Facebook. And if any of you ever get a chance to visit Northern New York, The Adirondacks are absolutely beautiful. The Akwesasne Mohawk Reservation, that's where my mother's from too, is a beautiful geographic area of the United States if you haven't seen it. There's a lot to see. It's an hour from Montreal, hour from Ottawa, less than an hour. Beautiful, beautiful scenery. Don't go in the winter unless you want to ski or snowmobile or ice fish though. It's a little cold. And as always, everyone, please, any feedback about any of our programs, we're glad to hear. We're always looking for improvement in different art mediums and different artists to share work about. And our next meeting is February 18th with the Urbaniak family from Poland. Yes, Poland, the country in Europe. Perry Flanagan knows the artist, and we think their unique painting style and story will also be very interesting. Please read the upcoming AGTV newsletter announcement with information about these artists and our February meeting details. And you know, Dave mentioned about the baskets, and just behind me on the wall are some of my basket collection from home. And I've got baskets from some of my aunts that are from the 30s and 40s and up to current day. And someday we'll do a tour at my house and we'll look at some of the baskets as a precursor to hopefully one day you get up to the Six Nations Museum where Dave is and you get to experience more of our culture. So thank you again, Dave, for a great presentation, and your artwork is beautiful, and hope everyone has a great day and appreciate your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.